So let's start with one that I learned on the job at Disney, which is bleed. I was designing an invitation for an event that we were having, and the printer had to actually teach me what a bleed was and why it was important. It is what I like to call that little bit of extra space. It's the term that refers to the edge of the sheet that's going to ultimately be trimmed off by the printer. It's important to know what the bleed area should be. Again, this is something you should find out from your printer before you start your project. Here is a quick illustration of what a bleed is. If this was your desired artwork edge, but you wanted the color or the image or anything to extend all the way to that edge, you actually have to create the art file with your artwork being this big so that you can have that orange area, which is a bleed, that will ultimately be trimmed off, allowing your artwork to go all the way to the end. So whether that's a background color or a picture, you need to make sure that it is not something that needs to be in what I call the safe area, which is the blue area, such as text. It should be superfluous, something that can be cut. Typical bleed is 1/8 of an inch or 0.125. That is always my default, what I go to, but you should, again, check with your printer. Always something you're going to hear me say is to check with your printer about what they prefer, because you will have printers that prefer a different measurement for their bleeds. CMYK is the color format for print. You've probably heard it before. The colors that CMYK stand for: cyan, magenta, yellow, and key or black. These colors combine to basically produce every color you can possibly think of. And then you have its web sister, which is RGB, not to be confused with RBG, the Supreme Court Justice. Simply stands for red, green, blue. These colors combine to create all of the colors you see in a digital application. Alignment, that is obviously just what it sounds like. It's how things line up. This is important to understand what you are doing in your specific design. Obviously, the more text you have, the more alignment matters. It's how it's positioned relative to other things on the page. Here's a super simple example of an old ad I did for Disney, and then it just shows you everything is aligned to the left in this case. Crop marks, another important thing to know from a printer. It's where to cut. If they want crop marks on there, it's important to know. Some printers do, some printers don't. They're also known as trim marks, and it's ultimately where they're going to cut your bleed off. Here's an example of a book I did, The Avocados Go Camping, and you can see up in the corner that is a crop mark that was provided to the printer in the final publishing file so that they knew where to trim the book. Hierarchy. This is where to look. It is one of those 5 basic principles of typography design. Basically creates an organization and direction in your design. It's essentially the order of items you want the viewer's eye to go to. For example, here is a magazine ad I did. Obviously you want the headline to stand out. So I used color and font and size of font for that, and then matching it with the website, which is the call to action, and then you'll notice all the pasta is directing your eye inward towards the book. Another quick example is this poster. Obviously you want to see the headline first. It was important for the client. They wanted summer to be the word that caught people's eye. Then you want them to know the date. Then they wanted the price, and then they wanted this information to be extremely secondary. Pixel. What is a pixel? They make up everything. It is the combination of the words picture and element. It's the smallest basic unit of programmable color on a computer. All digital images are made up of a large number of individual pixels. I like to think of them as tiny squares that make up of an image, kind of like when you have one of those pictures that's made up of lots of little pictures. That's just what happens in my brain when I think of a pixel. Like if you zoomed in on a picture and you would see all the tiny bits of color that make up the picture. Next we have PPI and DPI, and this is how things measure up. 2 measurements used to measure the resolution of an image. This is an important thing to know about any project what resolution they ultimately need it to be. PPI stands for pixels per inch, DPI stands for dots per inch. They refer to the amount of pixels or dots can be placed in a line across 1 linear inch. PPI is used to describe the resolution of a digital image. DPI is used to describe the amount of ink dots in a printed image. The industry standard is typically 72 PPI for web or digital images that ultimately are not going to be used for print. And print, it should be 300 DPI. That's very standard. Raster. A raster image is basically the opposite of vector. It is what it is. There is nothing that can be resized, especially up, without losing some sort of quality. It's made up of a certain number of pixels. It has its own color, hue, saturation, transparency, and that cannot be adjusted without affecting the quality. For example, a picture is a raster image. Here's a picture of a cupcake. If you zoomed in on it, it's going to blur. It's not going to look as good. It's important that logos are never a raster image. They should always be vector. And a vector, the sky is the limit. It is something that can be scaled to a billboard or all the way down to a sticker. It doesn't matter because a vector is made up of a mathematical equations. I'm not going to pretend to really understand the details behind it. All I know is that it can be scaled, resized to any size it needs to be, retaining its quality, which is why it's very important for logos to always be vector. And often many graphic design projects should be vector-based. Icons, etc. They're the most useful graphic image around. For example, here is an icon that I made for the course, and you can see it can be scaled as large as I could ever possibly want it to be. White space, letting something breathe. This is an important part of design, is giving something space. It does not necessarily mean that it needs to be white. It can be a color, pattern, texture, anything that gives the artwork, the text, room to breathe. Here's an example of something I did where it can show you the white space. Here's an ad I did for a distillery, and here are some indications of where some of the white space would be. And then if you look, I just adjusted it without that white space, and it just looks crowded. Another example is this YMCA ad, and then this would be without that white space around the text, and it just looks crowded. You don't have a margin, you don't have a border. It just does not have room to breathe. Next up, we're going to touch on file formats. First up is AI. This is the native Illustrator file format. You always want to save your source files in that so you can use them for future edits, etc. in Illustrator. PDF, everybody's heard of a PDF, stands for Portable Document Format, which I did not know till recently what it stood for, but it's a PDF. Essentially, the format is used when you need to save files that cannot be modified but still need to be easily shared and printed. Today, almost everyone has Adobe Reader or other program that on their computer that can read a PDF file. However, you can also save a PDF in Illustrator that others who they can see it, but they might not own Illustrator, but it can be saved preserving the Illustrator editing capabilities. If you just check that box when you're saving it, so that it can still be edited as a vector file. It's very useful. An EPS file. This is helpful because virtually all page layout, word processing, and graphic applications accept imported or placed EPS files or encapsulated PostScript files. The EPS format preserves many of the graphic elements you can create with Adobe Illustrator, which means that EPS files can be reopened and edited as Illustrator files. However, it's important to note that just saving something, such as a JPEG or other file format as an EPS, especially in Photoshop, for example, does not in any way make it usable as a vector file. I have had many clients just have somebody or save it as an EPS file and think that they're sending me now a vector file, and that does not convert to a vector file or anything of the sort. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. They're ideal for saving, as the name suggests, vector images. Advantages for this format are potentially smaller file sizes than their rasterized counterparts like JPEG, PNG, or GIF. These are basically the same as an AI file. They just might not have been created in Illustrator, or they might be an instance where someone requests specifically an SVG file, and you can just save your vector artwork in Illustrator as an SVG formatted file. Be sure to check out ktdesignacademy.com for the latest freebies and my books that you can grab on Amazon, more videos, and everything you could possibly need for your graphic design education. All right, can't wait to see everybody's design, so don't forget to tag me. Good luck!